Michael never believed that a perfect life was about having everything. For him, happiness was always found in the small moments, the quiet conversations after a long day, the sound of laughter filling the house, and the feeling of knowing there was someone waiting for him when he came home. 10 years earlier, before the arguments, before the distance, before everything changed, Michael and Sarah had a love story that many people dreamed about. They met when they were both still trying to figure out who they wanted to become. Michael was working long hours at a small company, trying to build a career from nothing. Sarah was ambitious, kind, and full of dreams about the future. Neither of them had a perfect life, but they had something more valuable than money. They had each other. Their first conversation was simple. There was nothing dramatic about it. No movie-like moment. No instant promise that they would spend forever together. It was just two people sitting in the same coffee shop on a rainy afternoon, talking longer than they expected. Michael remembered how easily Sarah made him laugh. She had a way of making ordinary moments feel special. She didn't care that he didn't drive an expensive car or that he wasn't already successful. She saw his effort, his kindness, and the way he always tried to do the right thing. For Michael, Sarah was different from everyone else. She wasn't impressed by what he had. She believed in what he could become. As their relationship grew, they built their life slowly. They didn't start with luxury vacations or expensive gifts. Their early years were filled with simple experiences that became their most treasured memories. They cooked dinner together in their small apartment. They watched movies on old furniture they couldn't afford to replace. They celebrated birthdays with homemade meals. They talked for hours about the future they wanted to create. Michael often told Sarah, "One day, we'll look back at these moments and miss them." She would smile and reply, "I think we'll always remember them." And she was right. Those moments became the foundation of everything they built together. When they got married, they didn't have a huge ceremony. It wasn't the type of wedding people would see in magazines. But to Michael and Sarah, it was perfect. They stood in front of the people they loved and promised to stay together through every challenge. At that moment, they truly believed nothing could break them. The first few years of marriage were not always easy. Michael worked harder than ever because he wanted to create security for their future. He took extra shifts, accepted more responsibilities, and sacrificed his own comfort to make sure Sarah never felt alone. There were nights when he came home exhausted, but he still asked about her day before talking about his own problems. There were weekends when he wanted to rest, but he spent them helping around the house or planning something special for her. Michael wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He sometimes became too focused on work. Sometimes he forgot that success wasn't only about providing financially, it was also about being emotionally present. But one thing never changed. He loved Sarah deeply. When they welcomed their first child, their world changed completely. Michael remembered holding the baby for the first time and feeling a responsibility he had never experienced before. He looked at Sarah and thought about how lucky he was. This was the life he had always wanted. A loving wife. A family. A home filled with memories. For years, Michael and Sarah faced every challenge together. They moved to a better house. They worked through financial struggles. They supported each other during difficult times. Whenever one of them felt weak, the other became their strength. Their friends often admired their relationship. "You two have been through so much," people would say. "How do you keep your marriage so strong?" Michael always gave the same answer. "Because we choose each other every day." And for a long time, that was true. They chose each other through stressful days. They chose each other through disagreements. They chose each other when life wasn't easy. But somewhere along the way, something began changing. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. It happened slowly. The same way a small crack can appear in a strong wall before anyone notices. Sarah started feeling like life had become predictable. She looked around and saw other people traveling more, buying bigger houses, and living what appeared to be more exciting lives. At first, she ignored those feelings. She reminded herself that she had a loving husband and a family that many people would be grateful for. But comparison has a dangerous way of changing how people see their own lives. The more Sarah looked at what others had, the more she focused on what she believed she was missing. Michael noticed small changes but didn't understand what they meant. She became quieter. She seemed less interested in the things they used to enjoy together. The conversations that once lasted for hours became shorter. The laughter that once filled their home became less frequent. Michael assumed it was just a difficult phase. Every marriage has difficult seasons, he thought. He believed they would get through it like they always had. Because for 10 years, every problem they faced had a solution. Every storm had eventually passed. He never imagined that the biggest challenge of their marriage wouldn't come from outside forces. It would come from the heart of the person he trusted the most. Michael continued working, believing he was protecting the future they had built. He didn't know that while he was trying to hold their life together, Sarah had started questioning whether that life was still the one she wanted. He didn't know that the woman who once promised to stand beside him forever was slowly becoming someone who felt trapped by the very life they had created together. And the most painful part was that Michael still loved her the same way he did on the day they met. He still believed their story was unfinished. He still believed that after 10 years of memories, promises, and sacrifices, their love was strong enough to survive anything. But sometimes, the person you would fight the hardest to keep is already fighting a different battle inside their own heart. And Michael was about to discover that the hardest goodbye isn't always the one where someone leaves. Sometimes, it's the moment you realize they had already started leaving long before they walked out the door. For months, Michael tried to convince himself that everything was normal. He told himself that every marriage went through difficult periods. He reminded himself that after 10 years together, it was impossible for every day to feel as exciting as the beginning. Life became busy. Responsibilities increased. People changed. That was normal. At least, that was what he wanted to believe. But deep down, Michael could feel something slipping away. The woman who once couldn't wait to tell him about her day now seemed distracted whenever they talked. The late-night conversations they used to have became rare. The small moments that once brought them closer slowly disappeared. Sarah was physically present, but emotionally, she felt miles away. Michael noticed it in little things. She stopped asking about his work. She stopped getting excited about their weekend plans. She stopped looking at him the way she used to. And the hardest part was that Michael didn't know how to fix something he couldn't understand. One evening, he came home earlier than usual. He had canceled an important meeting because he wanted to surprise Sarah. He picked up her favorite dinner, bought flowers, and imagined spending a quiet evening together like they used to. When he walked through the door, he found Sarah sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "Hey, I thought we could have dinner together tonight," Michael said with a smile. Sarah looked up briefly. "That's nice." Her response was polite, but there was no excitement behind it. Michael noticed. "You okay?" "I'm fine." He knew that answer. It was the answer people gave when they didn't want to explain what they were really feeling. "Are you sure?" Sarah sighed. "Michael, I'm just tired." He nodded, trying not to push. But that night, while they ate dinner in silence, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. The problem wasn't one argument. It wasn't one mistake. It was the distance growing between them day after day. As time passed, Sarah started spending more time away from home. She joined new social circles. She attended more events. She became interested in a lifestyle that felt completely different from the simple life they had built together. At first, Michael supported her. He wanted her to be happy. If she wanted new hobbies, new friends, or new experiences, he didn't want to hold her back. He loved seeing her excited. But slowly, he noticed that the excitement she once shared with him was now reserved for a world he wasn't part of. Sarah began comparing their life with the lives she saw around her. She looked at couples posting pictures from luxury vacations. She saw people buying expensive homes and driving expensive cars. She watched others appear successful, confident, and free. And without realizing it, she started believing that her own life was somehow smaller. She forgot the years of memories they had created. She forgot the nights when Michael stayed awake working extra hours to support their family. She forgot the sacrifices they both made. Instead, she focused only on what she thought they lacked. One day, during an argument, Sarah finally said the words Michael had secretly feared. "I feel like we're stuck." Michael looked at her in confusion. "Stuck?" "Yes. We've been living the same life for years." He was hurt by those words. Because to him, the life they built wasn't something ordinary. It was something valuable. "We have a family. We have a home. We have each other." Sarah looked away. "Sometimes I wonder if that's enough." Those words stayed with Michael long after the conversation ended. Because for 10 years, he believed love was the most important thing. Now he was realizing that Sarah had started searching for something else. Something he couldn't give her. A different kind of excitement. A different lifestyle. A different version of happiness. Then someone new entered Sarah's world. His name was Daniel. Unlike Michael, Daniel represented everything Sarah had recently started admiring. He was wealthy, confident, successful. He traveled frequently, owned expensive things, and lived a lifestyle that looked perfect from the outside. At first, Sarah told herself that Daniel was just a friend. Someone who understood her ambitions. Someone who showed her a world she had never experienced. But emotional distance can create opportunities for people to seek connection somewhere else. The conversations with Daniel became more frequent. The messages became longer. The attention felt exciting. And slowly, Sarah started comparing the two men. Michael represented the life she already knew. A life filled with memories, responsibilities, and years of effort. Daniel represented something new. A life filled with possibilities and excitement. What Sarah didn't understand was that new doesn't always mean better. Sometimes, new only looks better because you haven't seen the challenges hiding behind it. Michael noticed the change. He wasn't blind. He saw the way Sarah smiled at her phone. He saw how quickly she protected her messages. He saw how defensive she became whenever he asked simple questions. One night, he finally asked the question that had been haunting him. "Is there someone else?" Sarah became silent. That silence hurt more than any answer. Because Michael already knew. After several moments, she finally spoke. "Michael." He closed his eyes. He didn't need to hear more. The person he had trusted for 10 years was no longer standing on the same side of the relationship. "I never wanted this to happen," Sarah whispered. But it did. Michael felt like the entire world had suddenly become unfamiliar. The woman who once promised to grow old with him was now the person he needed to protect himself from. "How long?" he asked quietly. Sarah looked down. "A few months. A few months." Those words felt impossible. 4 months, she had been living with a secret while Michael continued believing they were building a future together. He thought about every dinner they had shared. Every family moment. Every promise. And suddenly, he questioned whether those memories meant the same thing to her. "Are you leaving?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. But her silence was enough. A week later, the conversation that changed everything finally happened. Sarah packed her belongings. Michael stood in the doorway watching the woman he loved prepare to leave their home. The home they had built together. The place where they had raised their family. The place where they had promised forever. "I never wanted to hurt you," Sarah said. Michael looked at her with sadness rather than anger. "I know. Then why does it feel like you don't care?" Because he did care. More than she would ever understand. But sometimes loving someone doesn't mean you can stop them from breaking your heart. I spent 10 years choosing you, Michael said softly. I just wish you had chosen me too. Sarah started crying. For a moment, Michael saw the woman he had fallen in love with. The woman who used to laugh beside him. The woman who once believed their love could overcome anything. But that moment passed. She picked up her bags and walked away. The door closed quietly behind her. There was no dramatic goodbye. No angry words. No revenge. Just silence. A silence that felt heavier than any argument they had ever had. Michael stood alone in the house that once felt like a place of love. Now every room carried memories of someone who was no longer there. He had lost his wife. He had lost the future he imagined. He had lost the person he thought would always stay. But what Sarah didn't know was that leaving Michael behind would not destroy him forever. Because sometimes the person who breaks you is unknowingly pushing you toward becoming someone stronger. And while Sarah believed she was walking toward a better life, Michael was about to begin the hardest journey of his life, the journey of rebuilding everything she left behind. The first few months after Sarah left were the most difficult months of Michael's life. For 10 years, his entire world had been built around his family. Every decision he made was connected to the people he loved. Every long day at work, every sacrifice, and every difficult moment had a purpose because he believed he was building something permanent. Now, that future was gone. The house that once felt warm and alive suddenly felt empty. The same rooms that had been filled with conversations, laughter, and family memories became reminders of everything he had lost. The hardest moments were not the big ones. They were the small ones. Walking into the grocery store and automatically reaching for Sarah's favorite snacks. Coming home after work and forgetting for a second that no one was waiting for him. Seeing an old photo and remembering a version of life that no longer existed. Michael had spent 10 years creating a home. Now he had to learn how to live in it alone. At first, he struggled to accept what had happened. Part of him still believed Sarah would come back. He imagined her realizing her mistake. He imagined her knocking on the door, apologizing, and saying she wanted to rebuild their marriage. That hope kept him trapped in the past. He wasn't moving forward. He was waiting for someone who had already chosen to leave. His friends noticed the change. "You can't keep living like this," his brother James told him one evening. Michael looked down at his coffee. "I don't know how to move on." James stayed quiet for a moment before answering. "You don't have to forget what happened. But you do have to decide whether this pain will destroy you or change you." Those words stayed with Michael. Because deep down, he knew James was right. Sarah had made a choice. But now he had a choice too. He could spend the rest of his life wondering why he wasn't enough. Or he could become the person he was always capable of becoming. For the first time in months, Michael stopped asking, "Why did she leave me?" And he started asking a different question. "Who do I want to become now?" That question became the beginning of his transformation. He started with the basics. He rebuilt his daily routine. He woke up earlier. He started exercising. He began taking care of himself in ways he had ignored for years. At first, it wasn't about becoming successful. It wasn't about proving anything to Sarah. It was simply about surviving. Some mornings were still painful. Some nights were still lonely. But every day he chose to keep going. Slowly, the man who had been broken by his circumstances started becoming stronger because of them. Michael also realized something important. During his marriage, he had spent so much time being a husband and provider that he had forgotten who he was as an individual. He had stopped pursuing some of his own dreams. He had stopped learning new things. He had stopped challenging himself. So he started again. He enrolled in professional courses. He improved his skills. He studied business strategies. He started reading about leadership, communication, and personal growth. The same discipline that helped him support his family now helped him rebuild his own life. At work, people began noticing the difference. Before, Michael was hardworking but often distracted. Now, he was focused. His confidence returned. His ideas became stronger. His managers started trusting him with bigger responsibilities. He wasn't just doing his job anymore. He was growing. A year after Sarah left, Michael received an opportunity to lead a major project at his company. Many people doubted whether he was ready. But Michael knew something they didn't. He had already survived the hardest challenge of his life. A difficult project didn't scare him anymore. Failure didn't scare him anymore. Starting over didn't scare him anymore. Because he had already lost the thing he thought he couldn't live without. And he was still standing. The project became a huge success. It opened doors he never expected. Michael was promoted and began working with important clients. His career started moving faster than ever before. But the biggest change wasn't his professional success. It was the person he had become. He no longer needed someone else to confirm his value. He no longer measured himself by whether Sarah regretted leaving. He finally understood that his worth had never depended on someone else's decision to stay. 3 years after the separation, Michael made another important decision. He left his comfortable corporate position and started his own company. Many people thought he was taking a huge risk. "You finally have stability," a colleague told him. "Why start over?" Michael smiled. "Because I don't want to spend my life choosing comfort over growth." The beginning was difficult. There were months when business was slow. There were nights when he questioned whether he had made the right choice. But unlike the man he had been years earlier, Michael no longer gave up when life became difficult. Pain had taught him patience. Failure had taught him resilience. Loneliness had taught him independence. Slowly, his company began growing. 1 client became 5. 5 became 20. The small business he started from a simple idea became something much bigger than he imagined. Years earlier, Sarah had left believing Michael was not the kind of person who could give her the life she wanted. But she never saw the man he would become. She never saw the discipline created by heartbreak. She never saw the confidence built from struggle. She never saw the strength that came from having nothing left to lose. 5 years after she walked away, Michael's life looked completely different. He had a successful career. He had financial stability. He had a strong circle of people who respected him. But more importantly, he had peace. One evening, Michael sat in his office after everyone had gone home. Through the window, he looked at the city lights below. Years earlier, he had sat alone in the same house wondering if his life was over. Now he realized something. That wasn't the end of his story. It was the moment his real story began. He thought about Sarah. Not with anger. Not with hatred. Just with understanding. She had been a chapter in his life. A meaningful chapter. A painful chapter. But not the entire book. Michael finally accepted that sometimes people leave not because you weren't valuable, but because they are unable to recognize your value at that moment. And sometimes losing someone is the painful event that forces you to discover yourself. He didn't rebuild his life to make Sarah regret leaving. He rebuilt it because he finally understood that he deserved a life he was proud of. And while Michael had no idea what the future would bring, one thing was certain. The man Sarah left behind was gone. In his place was someone stronger, wiser, and completely ready for whatever came next. 5 years had passed since Sarah walked away from the life she had built with Michael. During that time, both of their lives had changed completely. Michael had become a different person. The man who once questioned his own worth had learned to trust himself. He had built a successful company, surrounded himself with people who respected him, and created a life filled with purpose. But Sarah's life had taken a very different direction. When she first left, she believed she was finally choosing the happiness she deserved. She believed she was escaping a life that had become too predictable. She believed that a new relationship, a more exciting lifestyle, and financial comfort would give her everything she had been missing. For a while, it looked like she was right. From the outside, her new life appeared perfect. Daniel had money. He had connections. He could give her experiences she had once dreamed about. Luxury restaurants. Expensive vacations. A beautiful home. A lifestyle that looked impressive to anyone watching from the outside. For the first time, Sarah felt like she had entered the world she had always wanted. But what she didn't understand was that appearances could hide a lot of truth. The excitement slowly faded. The person who seemed perfect in the beginning started showing a different side. Daniel became less patient. Less caring. Less interested in making Sarah feel valued. The same confidence she once admired slowly turned into arrogance. The same ambition she found attractive became his obsession. Sarah began realizing that having more things didn't necessarily mean having more happiness. She had left a man who loved her deeply for a life that looked impressive but felt empty. The moments that hurt the most were the quiet ones. The nights when she came home to a beautiful house but had no one to share her thoughts with. The days when she achieved something but had no one who genuinely celebrated with her. She started remembering Michael. Not the version of Michael she had convinced herself she needed to leave. The real Michael. The man who listened to her. The man who supported her dreams. The man who stayed beside her through difficult times. At first, she tried to ignore those memories. She told herself she was only feeling nostalgic. She told herself everyone missed the past sometimes. But the more time passed, the more she realized something painful. She hadn't left because Michael was a bad husband. She had left because she stopped appreciating what she already had. Eventually, her relationship with Daniel began falling apart. The arguments became more frequent. The trust disappeared. The lifestyle that once seemed exciting became exhausting. One evening, after another painful argument, Sarah sat alone in the same house she once believed represented success. She looked around at the expensive furniture, the beautiful decorations, and everything she had once thought would make her happy. But all she felt was emptiness. For the first time in years, she admitted the truth to herself. She had lost something valuable. Something money couldn't replace. She had lost someone who loved her before she had anything impressive to offer. Someone who believed in her when there was nothing to gain. Someone who chose her every day. That realization was painful. Because Sarah knew the person she missed was not just Michael. She missed the version of herself she was when she was with him. A person who felt loved. A person who felt safe. A person who didn't need to constantly chase something bigger. After her relationship with Daniel ended, Sarah went through one of the hardest periods of her life. The world she thought she had chosen began falling apart. The future she imagined disappeared. And for the first time, she had to face the consequences of her decisions. Her friends told her to move on. Maybe you should contact Michael, one of them suggested. Sarah immediately rejected the idea. How could she go back after everything she had done? How could she face the man whose heart she had broken? She remembered the last words Michael said before she left. "I spent 10 years choosing you. I just wish you had chosen me too." Those words never left her. They followed her through every difficult moment. Months passed before Sarah finally found the courage to search for Michael. She discovered that he had become successful. Not the kind of success that came from showing off. The kind that came from hard work and respect. She saw articles about his company. She saw interviews where people praised his leadership. She saw a man who had turned his pain into strength. And that was when she realized something that hurt more than anything. The man she thought she was leaving behind had become the man she always hoped he could become. But now, she wasn't part of that journey. After days of hesitation, Sarah finally sent him a message. She didn't know what she expected. Maybe anger. Maybe rejection. Maybe silence. But Michael responded politely. "Sarah. I hope you're doing well." Those simple words brought tears to her eyes. Because even after everything, he wasn't cruel. He wasn't bitter. He had truly moved forward. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe. The same kind of place where their story had once begun. When Sarah saw Michael walk through the door, she felt a wave of emotions. The man in front of her looked familiar but different. He carried himself with confidence. He seemed peaceful. He wasn't the broken man she remembered leaving behind. Michael sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 5 years of memories stood between them. Finally, Sarah whispered, "You look happy." Michael smiled. "I am." Those 2 words hurt more than she expected. Because she realized he had found happiness without her. "I'm sorry," she said. Michael looked at her quietly. "For everything. I know I can't change what happened. I know I hurt you. But I've thought about it every day. I made the biggest mistake of my life." Michael listened. Not because he wanted revenge. Not because he wanted to see her suffer. But because he had finally healed enough to hear her without breaking. Sarah took a deep breath. "I left because I thought I was missing something. I thought there was a better life waiting for me. But I didn't understand that the best thing I had was someone who loved me completely." Her voice became emotional. "I lost someone who would have stood beside me through anything." Michael looked down for a moment. The memories were still there. The love was still part of his history. But he was no longer the same man. "I missed you," Sarah admitted. "I missed us. And I know I don't deserve another chance. But I wanted to tell you the truth." She looked into his eyes. "If there is any possibility, any chance at all, I would do anything to fix what I broke." For the first time in 5 years, Sarah allowed herself to hope. But she didn't know that Michael's decision would not come from the pain of the man she left behind. It would come from the wisdom of the man he had become. And that decision would determine whether their story was truly over or whether some chapters were meant to be rewritten. Michael sat quietly across from Sarah, listening to every word she said. For the first time in 5 years, he saw the woman he had once loved more clearly than ever. Not the person who had walked away. Not the person who had broken his heart. But the person who was sitting in front of him, carrying the weight of regret and realizing the consequences of her choices. Sarah had tears in her eyes. "I know I hurt you," she whispered. "I know I destroyed something that can never be replaced." Michael looked at her for a moment before speaking. "You're right." Sarah lowered her eyes. "But I don't hate you." Those words surprised her. After everything that happened, she expected anger. She expected him to remind her of every painful moment. She expected him to make her feel the same pain she had caused him. But Michael didn't. Because the man sitting across from her was no longer controlled by his wounds. He had spent years healing. Years learning that holding on to anger only kept him connected to the person who hurt him. He had finally reached a place where he could remember the past without wanting to return to it. "I spent a long time being angry," Michael said. "I replayed everything in my mind. I wondered what I did wrong. I wondered why 10 years of love wasn't enough." Sarah wiped her tears. "You didn't do anything wrong." Michael smiled sadly. "I know that now. But I didn't know it then. When you left, I thought losing you meant losing my value. I thought if the person who knew me best could walk away, maybe I wasn't enough." He paused. "But then I realized something important." "What?" "My worth was never decided by whether you stayed." Sarah looked at him silently. Those words hurt because they were true. The man she left behind had spent years trying to become enough for someone who had already stopped appreciating him. But now he understood something she didn't. He was always enough. He just needed to believe it himself. Sarah reached across the table. "Can we try again?" Her voice was filled with hope. "Not because I'm lonely. Not because I lost everything. But because I finally understand what I had." Michael looked at her hand. A part of him remembered the old days. The love. The laughter. The dreams. There was a time when he would have done anything to hear those words. A time when he would have forgotten every painful moment just to have her back. But time changes people. And healing changes what you want. "I believe that you regret what happened," Michael said. "I believe you've changed." Sarah looked hopeful. "Then why does it feel like you're saying goodbye?" Michael took a deep breath. "Because forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing." The words were gentle, but they carried the weight of truth. Sarah looked down. "I don't understand. I forgive you. But I can't go back to who we were." She looked at him with sadness. "Why?" "Because that person doesn't exist anymore." Michael looked out the window. "The Michael who waited for you every night. The Michael who believed our love could survive anything. The Michael who kept hoping you'd come back. He's gone." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I know. And that's why I'm not angry. But some things break in ways that cannot be repaired." The silence between them was painful. But it was honest. Michael wasn't rejecting Sarah because he wanted to punish her. He wasn't choosing himself because he wanted revenge. He was choosing himself because he had finally learned how important self-respect was. Sarah slowly nodded. "I guess I always thought if I came back, everything would go back to normal." Michael smiled softly. "That's the thing about time. It doesn't take us back. It only moves us forward." She looked at him. "I lost my chance, didn't I?" Michael didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was complicated. She hadn't lost him because she made one mistake. She had lost him because she made a choice. A choice that changed both of their lives forever. "I think we both lost something," Michael finally said. "You lost someone who loved you. And I lost the future I imagined. But maybe we both found something too." Sarah looked curious. "What?" "Growth." Michael smiled. "You taught me that I needed to love myself too. And I hope this experience teaches you to value the people who choose you." Sarah nodded as tears fell down her face. "I wish I understood that before." "So do I." They sat together for a few more minutes, remembering the years they shared. They talked about their first apartment. Their wedding day. The moments when life was simple. For a short time, it felt like they were remembering an old chapter of their lives. Not trying to rewrite it. Just appreciating that it happened. When they finally stood up to leave, Sarah looked at him one last time. "I really was happy with you." Michael smiled. "I know. I just forgot. I hope you don't forget again." She nodded. "I won't." They walked outside. The evening air was calm. The city continued moving around them, unaware that two people were saying goodbye to a decade of memories. Sarah stopped before leaving. "I hope someone gives you the love you deserve." Michael smiled. "I hope you learn to give that love to yourself first." She hugged him. A final goodbye. Not filled with anger. Not filled with regret. Just acceptance. When Sarah walked away, Michael watched her disappear into the crowd. 5 years earlier, watching her leave had destroyed him. Today, watching her leave gave him peace. Because he finally understood that losing someone doesn't always mean losing. Sometimes, the person who walks away creates the space for you to find yourself. Michael returned to his car and drove home. Not to an empty house filled with memories. but to a life he had built with his own hands. A life filled with purpose. A life filled with confidence. A life where he no longer waited for someone else to choose him, because he had finally chosen himself. And that was the greatest lesson of all. Love is beautiful. Memories are precious. But no relationship should require you to lose yourself to keep someone else. Sometimes people leave because they believe something better is waiting for them. Sometimes they return when they realize what they lost. But by then, the person they left behind may have already discovered something more valuable than their love. Their own worth. And that was Michael's final victory. Not that Sarah came back. Not that she regretted leaving. Not that she finally understood his value. His greatest victory was that he no longer needed her to understand. He already knew.